and welcome back to the Earth on Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am myself. With me is Josh.
Hello, everybody.
Actually, I'm Dan, but thank you for joining us. We have a single topic to cover today. We are going to actually do a few things, and so all things aeronautical are going to start off with. So if you have any questions for us, we didn't get any emails in the past week or so, which is just fine with us. We figured the holidays kind of kept everybody in a nice little stupor. So on today's podcast, we will be discussing, as I said, all things aeronautical. We're going to talk about airships. So this is Travel in Barsaiv Part 2, because we did riverboats a little while ago. But if you have any questions for us, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And we're going to tease something. We are going to bring up in a future episode, right around the corner, 2 or 3 weeks away, maybe even a month away, is a discussion on astral perception, astral sight, astral sensing, all that stuff. Josh wants to get into the differences involved. So if you have any questions for us about that, send them in.
Yes, that way we can combine those emails with discussion.
And that'll be the fun part. So we can eventually get there. Anywho, in the meantime, let's talk about the airships and travel. I want to start off with a couple of quick pop culture references, because I think that a case could be made where if you end up getting one of these or obtaining one of these, purchasing one of these, stealing one of these airships, the right kind, you could actually run your campaign with all of your players on the ship appropriately. And you could base it off of any number of TV shows or movies where the entire show takes place on the ship.
Okay.
Can you think of any pop culture references there, Josh? I have a small list.
Well, the one that sort of comes to mind offhand, and it doesn't all take place on the ship.
True.
But Firefly.
Yeah. I was going to lead with that.
The ship is an additional character. The ship is... like, there are some stories that revolve around the ship and things relating to Serenity. And so that is something that you could take in terms of an inspiration for a game that might be based on an airship, a smaller one or something like that.
Yeah, if you get just the right one. So here's a couple of just TV shows we can kind of keep in the back of our minds as we talk about the airships, as the list that we're going to go through today. Red Dwarf.
Oh, that's a good one.
Star Trek. Mm-hmm. Clearly. Killjoys. I think Battlestar Galactica.
Okay.
The Orville.
Yeah.
And Farscape.
Oh, Farscape is a good one.
So, a retelling of Buck Rogers. But still, there's just a few shows right there that we can kind of use as we talk about the ships that we're going to talk about. Maybe think about if this is the right ship to put your player characters on and have them roam about Barsaiv in that fashion. So, like last time, we're going to start off kind of biggest or smallest to biggest, just because canoe was the smallest we had in the last riverboat section up to the big old paddle wheel boats.
And that's the order that they're listed in the book we're referring to.
It doesn't hurt either. So, right down the list, right off the bat, actually, the airboat is the smallest type of airship, capable of carrying up to 5 human-sized name givers or 3 trolls without undue strain. Has a crew size of 1, which means it takes 1 person to operate the airboat, and that's pretty much it. So what do you think? This is
basically a flying canoe or rowboat. It's basically what it is. It is generally used as a little vessel that would be like a taxi service, maybe within a city, like you might have in Jarrus or Travar. You might have airboats that are used either by the patrol or watch to get from place to place. Mm-hmm. They might be used, to basically ferry around and do some work around the larger vessels in the shipyards and whatnot. But they're not designed for long distance travel, much like a canoe or rowboat. They're somewhat limited. For larger airships, you might have airboats on board as a kind of lifeboat type of situation.
Yes.
Or something like that, where you would have, say, a galley or a galleon, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that might have an airboat on board as kind of like a captain's launch. If you think about larger seagoing vessels, as sort of the equivalent of that, they might have a small skiff or rowboat or something like that could be used to go ashore in that kind of situation. So an airboat could also serve that role.
I love the base price. You actually could, if you get enough silver in your pocket, purchase one at 16,500 silver market
There
rate.
are prices that are listed. We're referring to the Game Master Compendium, the Red Brick, the Classic Edition. There are prices that are listed for the vessels, for some of the vessels in those. Yeah. I'm not sure where those prices came from. They, might be derived, because I know in some of the first edition material, there were costs for repairs and whatnot that kind of determined the total value of the various game stats that were provided for them, and the prices might be based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as we mentioned in the Riverboat episode, we haven't really brought game stats as much for the vessels forward into 4th edition yet, because we're still trying to figure out what exactly the system for using them is going to be. Mm-hmm. And then, we need to figure out how we're going to use them before we decide what kind of stats and numbers and things like that are going to be.
Fair enough. So you heard the emphatic word there, yet. They're coming.
Eventually.
They're coming. So we're going to skip one in the book to actually go with the small Drakkar, because it is actually smaller than a regular Drakkar, so just by size. Because the crew size on a small Drakkar is 15, and it's half the size of a regular Drakkar, so it's therefore smaller and faster and more maneuverable. But it also uses messenger ships to carry urgent information quickly across great distances. So these are more of the size we're talking about maybe when we get to those pop culture references, kinda.
Yeah.
But it's a fast scout and patrol ship.
Sure. The Drakkars are modeled stylistically, whether they're the smaller ones or the larger Drakkars, are kind of stylistically modeled after the Viking longships.
Oh, yeah.
That's the imagery that kind of goes along with them, which is to say it's a smallish vessel compared to some, but it is capable of traveling, with its supplies and whatnot, of traveling decent distances. It's got the cargo and crew capacity to actually do that.
Yeah.
These are the vessels that are most commonly associated with the highland trolls, the crystal raiders, and the trolls in other areas. But Drakkars could also be used if you're thinking of a more military style campaign, right? If you're looking at like Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or something like that, that the Drakkar would tend to be more of the strike force, the Defiant from Deep Space Nine, to pull another Star Trek reference, would be probably more of a Drakkar style vessel than the Enterprise or whatnot, which would be more like a galley or a galleon, where they are a much larger vessel. Yes. So that's what you'd be looking at with a Drakkar. A Drakkar is probably the vessel that would be most likely if you're going to have a group that's going to have their own airship, and you're not playing a game that is military-based or trade-based or something like that. The Drakkar is the most likely vessel to be the one that a player character group might be based out of, because the crew sizes are small enough that you don't necessarily need to worry about, a huge amount of crew or something like that. But even the small Drakkar, according to the game stats in the book we're referring to, has a crew size of 15, which means that even a player character group, which typically, 4 to 6 characters, is not likely, unless they're all experienced air sailors or crystal raiders with high air sailing ranks, are not going to be able to man that on their own, generally speaking.
Yeah. But this is where they can hire like 3 or 4 air sailors if they're making enough money.
I think I did not review the old style rules to check, but I think what the crew size really kind of indicates is the minimum number of successful air sailing successes required in order to use the vessel. So if it has a crew size of 15, then you could man it with 5 experienced sailors who will typically get excellent or better successes against the difficulty 6 that was the default air sailing difficulty in previous editions. And I think it's still sort of assumed default in the current one. And so you don't necessarily need 15 crew members, but if you have that many, then you don't need to have everybody rolling really, really well in order to maneuver the ship, and you generally end up with better results and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, the small Drakkar, the regular Drakkar, which shows a crew size of 30, those are the vessels that you typically would see associated with an airship type game that is not necessarily focused on the larger ships.
So if they were to, the point of going through all the ships that we're going through today is how exactly would game masters use this ship, this type of airship with their game? So would they entice the players to acquire one, or would they have to help navigate one and maybe take over another one from a raiding party or something along those lines? Or how would they incorporate this ship, this small Drakkar, into a campaign?
Well, I don't know that you need to entice players to go after an airship. That's one of the big questions that keeps kind of popping up with regards to airships is, how do we get an airship of our own? And we talked about
I want one.
Yeah, we talked about the price, like the actual sticker price, so to speak, of the airships as presented in that book. But you also need to remember that there is probably upkeep and repair. There is a crew that you would need to hire. An airship is not, it's not like fancy crystal plate armor where you kind of pay a one-time cost and then you've got something awesome. There's more that's involved. And whether any airship is going to be of use in the campaign really depends on what the campaign is about. If it's not an airship focused campaign, then the Drakkars, the smaller vessels, if you're going to have an airship, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, like it says, it's frequently a scout or messenger vessel, because they do tend to be faster and more maneuverable. If you're going to be some kind of, if the group is doing a mission for someone of wealth and power, whether that's a noble house in Thrall or maybe even the crown, or wealthy merchants in Travar or Jarrus or other places where airships are sort of common, that it might be that if their mission requires them to travel, they might be given use of a Drakkar to ferry them from, one place to another. The adventure Terror in the Skies, which revolves pretty significantly around airships. There's the main vessel that the group takes sort of initially, and then there's a Drakkar that kind of serves as a little, like I mentioned, the captain's launch kind of going out and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, at that point, one of the things that kind of happens with a lot of the ships in pop culture references that we had referred to, whether it's Serenity from Firefly, whether Moira from Farscape, the Defiant from Deep Space Nine, the Enterprise, for Star Trek, whichever version, although with the Enterprise, it doesn't tend to be quite that so much, but that the vessel becomes kind of a character in its own right, that it has a style and quirks and a temperament and whatnot that kind of go along with that. And so a Drakkar can certainly get that. The Crystal Raider Drakkars, the ones that are used by the trolls in the Twilight Peaks and elsewhere in Barsaiv, frequently are works of art in their own right, and that can give them a very a certain atmosphere or feeling or mood about them. The Drakkars that are used, for example, by the Bloodlore Moot would be very different stylistically than the ones by say the Ironmongers or the Sky Touchers, or something like that. And that can be something that plays into the themes or mood or style of either an adventure or a campaign arc or something along those lines.
So, okay. I think those are the two that are like acquirable for, or can be acquired if they wanted to possess one. So we now get to the slightly bigger ships that are different uses for a campaign by the game master. So the regular size Drakkar, a typical Drakkar measures about to 20 yards long, so times 3, 60 feet.
60
and 15 feet wide, so 5 yards. Banks of oars, sometimes a single mast for a sail. These are price guide, about 50,000 silver, so good luck. But this has a crew size of about 30. So this is a much larger ship. This is what I know the Crystal Raiders Drakkar. So this is about the size of what Crystal Raiders would be using. So dozens of trolls, because the crew size is at least 30. So that's a ton of trolls on there to lug around.
Yeah, these are the larger ones and probably a bit more styled after the Viking longships because of the Crystal Raiders and their association with that kind of cultural style. And they frequently will have weapons of some sort mounted on them. We won't even really get into weapons that much.
No, not so much.
This is where we start to get into situations where spear guns, net throwers, fire cannon, less frequently with the troll vessels, but you start to see them being able to be used on ships like this.
Yeah. So these are all just, as we said, rescue ships, messenger ships, or these are attack ships. So none of these really are commercially available to take you from place to place unless you bargain with the captain or something along those lines. Or like I said, you acquire the airboat, you acquire the small Drakkar, or you can sweet talk your way onto a Crystal Raider or help them out in some way, shape, or form, which is doubtful. So on to the next one, which is the galley. 30 yards long, 6 yards wide, nice and streamlined like a 747. This is typically in the fleets maintained by cities for shipping goods. So these have sails as well as oars, good speed, pretty good maneuverability, but they're really there to transfer stuff and people from one place to the next. Some of these have fire cannons. Good luck buying one, because I think a city has to pay about 150,000 silver to have one produced for them.
This is the most common, as you say, commercial vessel. Outside of the Drakkar for Barsaivian ships, this is what you would typically see. And there is probably a wide variety of hull designs and styles and things like that you would have. You could have things that basically look like the equivalent of a flying 3-masted schooner type vessel. You can have ones that are maybe a little bit more fantasy, steampunky kind of look. I mean, without the steam, but if you look at some of the art of airships in some of the Earthdawn things, like they'll have this really long extended like rudder thing hanging down below.
Oh yeah.
And having some really kind of somewhat unusual hull designs because they're largely driven by magic and don't necessarily need to adhere as well to the realities of fluid dynamics that waterborne vessels would. But these are the ships that basically run the major trade routes between the major cities. Yeah. And also most of the warships are equivalent to galleys as well in terms of what they've got.
Yeah.
The combat vessels of Thrall and any combat vessels that might exist as part of the fleets of other cities, although those would tend to be merchant vessels kind of pressed into military service and would not be as dedicated to combat as say the Royal Navy ships would be.
Yeah, because we didn't mention the crew rating. The crew size on a galley is roughly about 100, and it can carry about 150 passengers or a ton of cargo. And some mixture therein. About 20 years ago, there was a comic book put out by a company called CrossGen. They were in business for about 5 or 6 years, and they had one title called Meridian, and that actually had 2 warring nation states, and 1 produced airships. And so I fervently read that for any kind of inspiration and visuals to use for anything I was doing with Earthdawn, because I beg, borrow, and steal ideas where I possibly can. So if you can dig up old copies of that, I recommend it, just because the airships there, again, built on kind of the same watercraft designs, but had some neat stuff to go along with it as well. the plot didn't really center around the ships, but it was nice to have in the background and how they built things. So very cool to use. So this is mostly probably what people would charter from one place to the next if they needed quick passage somewhere.
Yep, that would be accurate. As we kind of talked about in the riverboat episode, travel by merchant airship is going to, unless you're willing to really, shell out to commission a specific trip somewhere.
Yeah.
If you've got the money to actually do that and to cover the costs of like hazard pay and all that sort of thing. The most likely use of galleys in terms of just travel is to go from, basically along major trade routes. And it is probably not unlikely for a galley to perhaps have an airboat on board, like I mentioned earlier, as a captain's launch or something like that. Mm-hmm. That if the passengers were not necessarily going to the final destination, but were getting off somewhere along the way, that they might get, run off or dropped off by airboat that kind of catches up with the vessel. One of the problems with airships is because space and cargo space is at a premium, because these are expensive vessels with somewhat limited capacity compared to a waterborne ship. It is expensive to bring mounts on board, and especially loading and unloading mounts from airships.
Yes,
can be difficult. So that is something to keep in mind as well.
This is kind of where I equate airship travel in Earth Dawn with the 747s we have today.
Yeah.
It's limited space. It's pretty expensive. Getting your pets or whatnot on board is also kind of a hassle. And there's an analogy to be made there, but it's not a perfect one. I understand that. So just going between the major population centers. Yeah. Like you're not going to get a 747 at your little airport
in a puddle jumper jaunt from
exactly
to a little regional spot. You're going, between Boston and New York, and generally for longer stretches, because even like a Boston to New York jaunt is not going to be done in a large plane like that. That's going to be a coast to coast or an international journey.
Yeah, that's a big thing. So anyway, like I said, that's just kind of how I think of it. My uncle used to work at the airport as a ramp rat, so I have something there. And my dad used to repair planes, so every once in a while I have those associations to make. So on to the Galleon.
Yep, the Galleon is pretty rare, actually.
Yes,
in Barsaivian officially, mm-hmm. There are only maybe half a dozen galleons total, if that. I think that, like, I know in the old, I think it was in the original Thrall source book, there was an adventure hook about the air galleons of Thrall, that they had like 2 or 3 that they put into storage before the Scourge, and part of the adventure is to, like, and their location was lost or forgotten or something, and part of the, like, the goal of the adventure is to go and recover them. This is part of building up the military strength to go up against the Therans. Mm-hmm. And I think it's possible that Thrall, it might get mentioned somewhere, that Thrall has commissioned a galleon to be built. And so these are the flagships. These are the really big, these are the military vessels, mm-hmm. As opposed to the galleys that are kind of pressed into it. These are the ones that are designed for combat. This is to draw the pop culture equivalencies. The galleons are like the Enterprise or the Galactica.
Yeah.
These are the ship is still maybe a character in a sense, but it is less so a character and more of a thematic location that a mobile location that a group is based out of. That typically they will be using that to get from place to place, but mostly going ashore, so mm-hmm. to speak, to have their adventures and whatnot. And if you're going to be dealing with a galleon, for the most part, you're going to be dealing with a military game. Unless you're doing something a little, obviously when you're coming up with your what's going on in your own table, you can do stuff different. But sort of in the official continuity, if you're dealing with galleons, you're dealing with the Throlic Navy and everything that goes along with that, whether the characters are freelancers that are being hired by the Navy and maybe going along as part of a mission, or, actually part of the Navy itself, maybe as a command crew or officer crew or something like that. There's a interesting possibility of a game, where the characters might be sort of senior staff on an airship, the same way that you've got the senior staff on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And what can go along with that. And also because they have such a large crew requirement, both the Galleon and the galley, you're looking at plenty of potential NPC reservoir for interactions and interpersonal dramas and all of the sort of stuff that can go along with that.
Totally. I actually played in a campaign. A friend of mine was running Earth Dawn, and we started off with brand new characters. And what we ended up finding was we began to excavate a galleon that had been buried under the earth. But the twist was that it was buried upside down. So we explored everything from the bottom up, literally. But it was very fun to do. So we were interested in getting that part taken care of, because this is a big, big ship. This is usually like a triple mast, 2 oar decks. Like we said, crew of 200. This is, 50 yards long. It's 150 feet, 10 yards wide. It can carry up to 1,200 troops if that's all you're going to carry. So it's a really big ship. So that was our care delving was not actually in a care. It was in a overturned galleon, diggered into the earth. So we had fun with that one. That was very nice.
It can't hold 1,200 troops.
It can't? Where did I get that?
The thing that I'm reading says an air galleon can carry up to 230 troops. I think you might be reading.
It was 230. My parentheses sucked. It looked like a 1. I had a parentheses around that number. I'm sorry.
I'm like,
200 troops.
I mean, it's a big ship. That was a lot.
Sorry.
But 150 feet, you're not fitting 1,200 people onto a 150-foot vessel.
That was my fault. My handwriting on that note was horrible. So I apologize profusely for that. My mistake. So, but that is, by the way, the last of the wooden built ships.
So the ships that we've talked about so far are all kind of based on the law of similarity, which is that their ability to fly is as a result of enchantments that basically allow them to treat the air as if it were water. And so that requires them to resemble water vessels so that they behave in a similar fashion as a result of the enchantments. And what this kind of means as well is that if they get damaged or whatever, they will list or founder or slowly sink the same way that a waterborne vessel would. The next group of ships that we're going to be talking about, the Theron ships, the stone ships, are, to kind of borrow from Douglas Adams, fly in the same way that bricks don't. In that basically they are a demonstration of the raw magical might of Thera and their ability to basically enchant a rock to have it float in the air.
Yeah.
And that rather than being driven by the mental ritual of rowing or sailing the same way that you would a water vessel, these basically, a lot of them, certainly the larger ones, draw on the life force of the slaves that are used as their crew complements.
Which is odd that I just recorded the story, The Brightest Star in the Sky, from the Earth Dawn, Legends of Earth Dawn, about a care that was... Go back and listen to that episode. So, on to the transport Vedette.
Yeah.
This is passenger and cargo transport, sometimes as a swift messenger ship, so roughly about the same size as a Drakkar, we think.
Yeah, the Vedette is sort of like, you've got the Drakkar, the galley, and the galleon as sort of the 3 tiers of the Barsaivian vessels. And then on the Theron side, you've sort of got equivalents for most of those. The Vedette being the Drakkar equivalent, which is to say that it's decent size. Like the transport Vedette, for example, has a crew size of 30, which is the same as the standard Drakkar.
Yeah.
And it's, roughly equivalent, but this is sort of like a barge in a sense. It is a stone vessel. They kind of tend to be shaped similarly to barges or boats, but tend to not be quite so much works of craftsmanship and art the same way that Drakkars are.
Yeah.
And they, there's three kinds of vedettes that are presented here. There's the transport vedette, which is just kind of the general workhorse transporting goods and people and cargo and whatnot. And then there's the mining vedette, which is the same kind of ship, but basically designed to perform elemental mining. And so is reinforced to deal with either the strong winds and weather and so forth associated with air mining, or resistant to the fire and lava of
Death Sea.
Fire mining.
Yeah.
And actually, there are probably, I didn't check this beforehand, but I think because there is fire mining that is done out of Travar, where they send miners, there's a whole section in the book about the fire miners of Travar and all of their cool stuff. But I think they use sort of Drakkars that are specifically designed for fire mining, which is, again, sort of the equivalent of that.
Yeah, because it's the same size ship, just less crew. That way they can carry more stuff back with them. So, because the mining that is, crew size of 20, it's the exact same size ship, but they have fewer crew quarters so that they can, again, bring back more ore or whatever they are mining for that. And then the last one you mentioned is the military vedette, because it is, of course, Thera, and this sucker comes armed.
Right. This is basically, the escort ship. This is the strike vessel that would accompany a Theran fleet, because they are, smaller in a sense, although it's not directly analogous. The military vedette is sort of like the equivalent of the short range, like the short range fighter bombers or that sort of thing that would launch off of a carrier. Yeah. They're larger. Like, obviously you think of fighters and they're, whatnot. They're usually just like 1 or 2 man planes, but they're based off of a larger vessel. Yeah. And the military vedette are sort of the escorts and fighters and more maneuverable vessels, like maybe more like a destroyer or something along those lines, if you're talking about modern Navy equivalent.
I was thinking this is your
up on that, but
this is your Memphis Belle. This is your B-17 bomber from World War II.
Yeah. That's again, where the difference being that the military vedette, while it does have some air combat capability, also does have a pretty sizable crew complement of air sailors.
Yep.
That
stone in the air somehow
can get delivered to a location for.
So the military vedette could actually hold up to 100 troops with a crew size of 40. So this is, again, the same size as the Crystal Raider Drakkars, just made out of stone instead. So it's therefore more sturdier to be able to handle the combat and transport all the troops. So this is your big, swift, bad mamma jamma there. So onto the Kila, the massive floating fortress built by the Therans. It's more like a flying castle than a traditional airship. It's 70 to 80 yards wide on a specific side. So it's probably just about as big as the inner ring of the Pentagon, if you wanted to go look that up.
Yeah.
It's freaking huge.
Where the military vedette is like the destroyer, the Kila is like the battleship or the carrier of a modern naval thing. That it's the really big.
This is your gunship.
Yeah, this is sort of your gunship.
Yeah, because the crew size is 170, can carry a full Theran cohort of 480 soldiers. So when this thing shows up, it's on.
Yeah.
Gonna say.
And they've got significant firepower in addition to the actual troop complement. They typically have notable firepower when it comes to fire cannons. And because it's basically a flying castle, it can bring a lot of power to bear. And this is sort of the Keela is the flagship around which sort of the Theran fleet movements tend to be based, with an exception that we will get to shortly. But basically, like, a Theran naval detachment is probably going to be a Keela with an escort of a couple of military vedettes along with it. And its purpose is to kind of go to a location and land, like, bombard and land troops.
Yeah.
That the vedettes would kind of be based out of or off of it in a certain regard.
Yeah. So let's go back to the vedettes real quick. So how would you work in for your campaign, or suggest a game master work in your campaign, their campaign, any one of the vedettes? The mining vedette, I think, is pretty obvious. They'd have to go, do some mining. Duh. But the transport vedette, perhaps they're traveling between cities into Thera.
Yeah.
Possibly.
So you've kind of got two options when it comes to these. One is if you are running more of a Theran campaign, whether you are doing things in other provinces or having a game that is, still in Barsaiv, but a Theran-based group, then the vedettes would largely serve the same kind of story role that Drakkars would in a Barsaivian game.
Yeah.
That, the transport vedette would be the vessel by which groups might be moved from location to location and that kind of thing. So that's one option, because obviously you're going to encounter these a lot more in Thera or other more Theran-controlled provinces like Crayana or Theran strongholds in Marak or Vazgothia or whatever. The flip side of that is if you're going to be running a more traditional game in that the player characters are Barsaivians and that the Therans are ostensibly antagonists in some regard, that the vedettes are likely to be something that is a target of an adventure, where the group might be going after a vedette that is transporting important people or intelligence or material. It's especially if you're going to be doing a game that is perhaps based around the activities leading up to the Second Theran War, like after the landing of the Triumph, and working perhaps with the Life Rock Rebellion and so forth. That's something that can still be done in a post-Second War situation, but the Therans have a much smaller military presence at that point, so it's maybe you would certainly at that point be a lot more likely, if you are dealing with Theran airships, to deal with vedettes as opposed to Keelas, because the Therans have pulled those ships pretty much out of Barsaiv.
Yeah.
Again, officially. So at that point, maybe the vedette could be the target of something, whether someone is being transported. Certainly the slavers that are associated with the Therans, if they've got any kind of airship capability, would be using vedettes to transport the slaves. So that could be something, again, to kind of serve as a target or an objective or something along the way of an adventure story. If you were running a Crystal Raider style game, if you're running a that kind of thing, vedettes would be a very common target, especially the mining vedettes working Death's Sea and whatnot would be a very common target for Crystal Raiders to go after.
Or, and another possibility is, there's a legendary item that may have been held by somebody who's on one, and that item crashed out of the sky during the war. Find it and find the item. Something along those lines. It could be at the bottom of a lake. It could be, as again, diggered in and covered up with, mounds and mounds of earth.
Yeah,
so
there's also the possibility, if you're going to be doing maybe like an espionage style game, again, kind of an against the Therans, if you could secure a vedette and use that in kind of like the way that the rebels used the Imperial shuttle in Return of the Jedi.
Oh yeah.
As a camouflage way of secretly getting forces from one point to another. That's a possibility as well.
Totally. Cause I think that brings up the Star Wars reference that the Keela may not be the Death Star, but it's darn close.
The Keela is not the Death Star. The Keela is not the Death Star. The Keela would be sort of the Star Destroyer, I guess, if you're kind of looking at the Imperial ships.
Yes.
that it brings a lot of firepower to bear. It is a powerful vessel.
Yep.
There's a pop culture reference of an iconic sort of ship, the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Is one that, a ship that has a lot of character and kind of serves as the mobile base for our heroes.
Totally.
But yeah, the Keela is sort of like the Star Destroyer of the Theran contingent, which is to say it's got a lot of firepower and can carry a lot of troops. And when it shows up,
you really don't want to see it in the sky.
Yeah, things are not great.
Yeah, they're not going well. So on to the actual Death Star, to use our reference here, the Behemoth, because there is only one. And to quote,
well, there's only one. There are a few behemoths. There are not many of them. Mm-mm. There are a few. I think the Therans in the Theran Empire book, it mentions that they've got 6 or 7.
Yeah,
something like that. They have a few, but the Behemoth is the Super Star Destroyer. It is the Death Star.
Yes,
it is like the Keela is a flying fortress. The Behemoth is a flying city.
Yeah, it's gargantuan.
It is very large, very powerful. The fact that the Theran Empire, one of the most mystically potent forces in the world, only has maybe half a dozen of them. That when they were decommissioning one, they basically said, well, we're gonna land it in this strategically important location because now that suddenly gives us a fortress.
Yeah, huge tactical advantage.
Yeah. That's one of the Keela can kind of do that as well. Mm-hmm. That if you land a Keela, you suddenly have a fort, an easily defensible fort that doesn't require you to do all of the digging and fortifications and construction that a fort actually would.
It's a castle. Just, add water, instant castle. But the Behemoth is add water, instant city.
Yeah, the Behemoth sort of in Barsaiv's reckoning, the Behemoth first showed up at the Battle of Sky Point, which was basically the moment where the Therans declared that they were an empire and Barsaiv was its first province. Mm-hmm. That during the Orichalcum Wars, the Crystal Raiders were doing all kinds of raiding and disrupting the Orichalcum trade and causing problems for Theran shipments, and the Therans basically told them to stop, and the trolls told them to get stuffed, and the Theran said, well, okay then, rolled up their sleeves and basically sailed a mountain at them and leveled an entire moot.
Yes.
And, that was one, and then the next time one showed up was basically in the Prelude to War supplement.
Yeah.
That, the Therans lost a behemoth to the dragons during the Orichalcum Wars, or during the conflict with the dragons. And it took multiple dragons to take it out. The behemoth is not something that you screw around with.
No.
Yeah.
So, that being said, since an assault was launched upon the Death Star, and people did infiltrate Star Destroyers and so forth, how would you incorporate a behemoth into your... this has to be like a different kind of care diving, but there's still people walking around that are living. So if you're going to send your party into the behemoth...
Yeah. At that point, the behemoth, I don't think can be necessarily treated as a vessel the way that Drakkars or galleys or vedettes or even Aquila to a certain extent could be. That the behemoth is a location. It just happens to be one that can move geographically.
Yeah.
It's got a crew size of 250. It's got, that's the crew that actually sails it. That's the how many slaves and whatnot that are required to kind of keep it going. But it's, at that point you get Prelude to War and you look at the information on the behemoth in there and what gets used. That the behemoth is a campaign shifting thing. Mm-hmm. When a behemoth shows up or when a behemoth is involved, you are looking at a very significant devotion of Theran resources. That it indicates that what they are doing, they consider to be extremely important.
Yeah, and your 5-person campaign is not necessarily going to take it out of the sky.
Yeah, well, that could be a long-term campaign goal. That would be something that would be really kind of cool. Mm-hmm. But again, you are free to do what you want in your own game, but a behemoth should not be something that just kind of casually shows up.
That needs a long lead time. You need to build up to that as a possibility.
Yeah, well, you need to build up to that. Again, the arrival of the Triumph, the behemoth that lands on the shores of Lake Ban, basically kicks off Prelude to War, which is a province-shaping series of events.
Yeah.
And, the things that kind of come about as a result of that. And it's a permanent, because it was being decommissioned, and after they landed it, they pulled the elemental air out of the hull, so it's basically never going to fly again. They basically landed a small town on the shore of the lake, and it's now effectively a permanent fixture.
Yeah, they planted their flag and they evacuated, so done.
So I don't have much advice except to say, look at what was done in Prelude to War. And that is the kind of thing that, ends up involving a behemoth. If you're going to have adventures revolving around a behemoth, whether that's the Triumph or some other behemoth that you bring into your game, you're looking at an assault or infiltration on a fortified enemy position, whether it is on the ground or in the air. There are going to be a lot of troops. There are going to be, experienced officers and that sort of thing. Like
and
the the overgovernor of Barsaiv had Aquila as his personal vessel. He didn't have a behemoth.
Yeah.
Again, the Death Star comparison is kind of apt.
I agree. That's why I stuck my foot in my mouth and said Aquila was the Death Star, then I forgot about it. And then, yes, the behemoth is actually the Death Star because that sucker is huge. And that is a big, big object to throw at people because, again, it's the size of a care or twice the size of a care. And so if they're going to infiltrate it, you better have some plans as far as floor plans, fortification plans, troop plans, magician plans, all these plans you better have, well laid out. If you're going to demand that your party somehow go into there and try and make it back out of there. That is not, don't throw a behemoth in there lightly. It's not something to trifle with. So, do you want to talk about ghost ships?
Well, ghost ship is sort of given its own category in this list, but really what a ghost ship is another airship that, is an airship of a certain type that has, for one reason or another, suffered some kind of catastrophe or some kind of problem where it's still airborne, it's still flying around, but the crew is dead or corrupted or undead or whatever, and kind of causes problems. The the Obsidian Flyer in Terror in the Skies could sort of be classified as a ghost ship, just because of the role that it plays. If you want to kind of talk about ghost ships, there's at that point that's a story with a ghost ship. You're looking at a story of how, what was it before? How did it become the way that it is? What's the problem that it's causing that the group is going to be dealing with? Whether that is just an adventure situation or whether that may be a campaign arc where they might need to learn about the ship and its history and things like that in order to overcome the problem that it solves. This is one thing we actually hadn't mentioned so much with airships, less so the case with riverboats. Yes. But airships, because of the nature of their enchantment, are all named. That is something that is sort of required or at least understood as far as the magic that makes them work goes. And so Drakkars and galleys and all of them, ships are traditionally named anyway, but these are named in the sense that they would typically have pattern items that you could learn things about, learn key knowledge of in order to gain power and influence over. And so maybe an interesting campaign arc would be if there's a ghost ship that's having problems, you maybe need to learn the actual name of the ship, maybe track down pattern items that may have been lost from the vessel into other places and use that as a way to perhaps break the curse or bring an end to it. Of course, there's always, if you're running a game, with a ghost ship, if you hire a galley or something like that to go and just kind of blow it out of the sky.
Always a fun time.
But yeah, the ghost ships basically present adventure potential, or campaign arc potential to deal with the hazard that they cause, because airships, were certainly around before the Scourge with the amount of shipping and everything, and with horrors and other things that might befall them. They're certainly something that could crop up.
Yeah. So we hope this helps inform some decisions about which ships to use when you're running a campaign, or which ships that you might be able to get passage on if you're a player in a campaign, and inquire about prices. We didn't talk about prices about passage because that's up to your game master and, whatever. But we wanted to talk about the ships themselves and how they are a setting and story foil to be used in your Earth Dawn campaign, because this is a large part of Earth Dawn is air travel. And we have air sailors and sky raiders that are two disciplines associated with this kind of air travel. So we wanted to make sure we actually hit on it properly to kind of whet your appetite to use them more, explore them more, and or come up with some names for some really cool flying ships. But otherwise, any final thoughts on anything we didn't actually cover?
No, except just to reiterate that when we had been kind of talking about pop culture ships, that a lot of times the ship ends up being a character in its own right, a location that has atmosphere and flavor and whatnot. And, you compare the homey kind of patchwork sense of the Millennium Falcon to the sort of sterile military straight lines and flat bulkheads of the Imperial shuttles or Star Destroyers or that sort of thing. And you can use that as a storytelling tool, as a way to set atmosphere or expectations. And when you're dealing with vessels as well, if you're going to have a adventure or whatever that's revolving around a ship, that ship is going to have a crew, and those NPCs can be varied. Again, one of the sort of secondary subplots or things in Terror in the Skies is dealing with the crew that you work with, alongside. In addition to sort of pursuing the missions, there are crew that come along with you on that, and dealing with those relationships and so forth. It's all, you get the people living together in a smallish space. And so there's all sorts of potential drama that can arise from that.
Absolutely. So, folks, thank you again for your time. Hope we answered some questions for you or inspired you to use more air travel of any kind in your campaign, or at least ask your game master if they want to use it in your campaign. You can contact us.
If you have any questions or stories about questions about airships, or stories that you want to tell about cool airships,
we'd love to hear them.
Use appearing in your game, send us an email, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget as well that we've got the episode coming up here where we'll be talking about astral sensing.
Yep.
And all of the kind of getting into the weeds on that a little bit. So send your questions or comments about that so that we can have those accumulated and maybe address some common questions that appear.
We're doing a lot of weed traipsing this year. Traipsing into the weeds.
We've covered the basics. Now it's time to
get into the weeds.
That's
okay. Until next time, folks, it is time for you to go sail into your own legend.
Good night, everybody.